David was a revolutionary artist in every sense. His work spoke the classical language of ancient Greece and Rome, austere, self-controlled, heroic. But he broke European painting away from the sentimental fantasy of the Rococo and gave it a harder edge. He was also a fully committed supporter of the French Revolution and Napoleon, using his art as a powerful instrument of political propaganda. Jacques-Louis David was born on the 30th of August 1748 in a house just along the Quai de la Mégisserie here in Paris. His father was an iron merchant who managed to buy himself a position in local government. But when David was just 9 years old, his father was killed in a pistol duel, leaving the family to be brought up by their mother and supported by two uncles. In 1765, aged 17, David became a pupil of Joseph Marie Vien, a professor at the Royal Academy who held lessons at his studio on the Rue de Montmartre. Whilst there, David received an injury to his cheek during a fencing match, which developed into a tumour that scarred him for life and made his speech difficult to understand. It seems likely that this made him even more determined to express himself visually. A year later, and David enrolled at the Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture, housed here in the former Palace of the Louvre. The Louvre was used not just for the Academy, but also provided studio space and lodgings for students as well as established artists. And the whole creative ethos of the place was towards large-scale history painting that David was determined to master. And this is one of his earliest efforts. It's called The Combat of Mars and Minerva, and it was produced in 1771, when David had been at the Academy for a few years and thought he was ready to enter the prestigious Prix de Rome competition, which enabled the winners to spend between 3 and 5 years in the Eternal City. In effect, it's a rather poor imitation of the academic style of the time, what's called Rococo, and it's clear that David was struggling to make his own mark. The Prix de Rome was an essential step on the road to becoming a successful artist, and so David entered the competition 3 years running, but on each occasion he failed to win. One year he was so bitterly disappointed that he even threatened to kill himself, but finally, in 1774, he won the prize and headed south. Due in part to his youthful arrogance, David didn't expect his work to be much affected by his time in Rome, but there's no doubt that by the end of his stay, his art was completely transformed. In many ways, it was the art of 17th century Rome that had a decisive influence on his work, particularly the paintings of Caravaggio. From him, David learnt how to employ light and dark to augment both the realism of his figures and the inherent drama of the painted narrative. Back in Paris, the influence of his time in Rome can clearly be seen in this work, Andromache Mourning Hector, a picture that gained him acceptance as a full member of the Academy. Produced in 1783, the painting depicts a scene from Homer's Iliad, where its bleak naturalism and acutely observed details marked a significant departure not only from David's early style, but from the predominant style of the Academy too. It drew some criticism, but generally the painting was admired, and David could now guarantee inclusion of his work at the Salon, which happened every 2 years and was the only public exhibition of art in 18th century France. More importantly, though, David now numbered among the select few who received the most prestigious commissions from the King, Louis XVI. In 1784, David began work on a royal commission that he'd received 2 years earlier, in which he decided to wrestle with the tragic and dramatic subject of the war between Alba and Rome in the 7th century before Christ. The painting's called The Oath of the Horatii. At the centre of the picture, we see Horace, the Roman king, handing over 3 swords to his 3 sons who are about to do battle. They're making their vows of devotion to their country and their father. On the right-hand side is where the dilemma creeps in. Nearest to the viewer in white is Camilla, the woman who's betrothed to one of the warriors from Alba, who our 3 brothers are about to fight. And next to her is Sabine, who is from the Alban side of the dispute, but she is married to one of the 3 brothers. So you have this extraordinary and powerful moral dilemma. It's an incredibly controlled and dispassionate painting in the way that it's actually produced, the way that oil is put on canvas by David. And in this respect, he's breaking away from the orthodoxy of the Academy at the time, who want their artists to show off a bit of bravura brushwork here, some white impasto there. So there's a new style of painting emerging here, what we now call neoclassicism. Now that doesn't mean that David is trying to paint like the ancients, but it means that he's trying to restore some of the values of the classical world to his art. When David showed it at the Salon, he told friends that this work wasn't for the king, this was for himself, and that in effect he was producing a manifesto for the way his art should go, and consequently he was hailed as the head of a new school of French painting, and that domination would last for the next 30 years.
David's membership of the Academy also meant that he acquired a studio and lodging at the Louvre. Here he established an extremely influential teaching practice, which produced some of the most talented young painters of the day, artists like Gros and Ingres. He also had married, recently, Charlotte Pécule, the daughter of a wealthy building contractor. Her large dowry meant that David, who'd never been particularly rich, was not wholly dependent on commissions for his income. But in contrast with David's personal and professional life, France itself was in crisis. Whilst the king and the aristocracy lived in unimaginable luxury, the majority of the population suffered in abject poverty. Reformers clamoured for change and demanded a constitutional monarchy. But when, in the summer of 1789, the king rejected this, the people of Paris took matters into their own hands and stormed the Bastille prison, seizing weapons from the armoury and, in effect, beginning the French Revolution.
David's response in his painting to the revolution, at least initially, was guarded. After all, he depended on the king and the aristocracy for patronage. Nonetheless, in the Salon of 1789, with the revolution beginning to rage around him, he showed this painting that, when we look at it, we'll realise was quite a provocative one. It's called The Lictors, or Roman Soldiers, returning to Brutus the bodies of his sons, and it shows not Marcus Brutus, the man responsible for the assassination of Caesar, but Lucius Brutus, the man who deposed the last king of Rome, Tarquin, and established, in 508 BC, the Roman Republic. What we see here, though, is the same compositional format and size as the Oath of the Horatii, but it's even more radical, because at the centre of the picture is a grey background, with Brutus's wife gesturing to the bodies of her sons that are being carted in on the left-hand side, seemingly across the picture plane, and then going straight back into the surface of the canvas, giving the work depth and movement. And then here in the foreground on the left-hand side is the